Hello everyone, I'm Azortharion, and in this video is your quick guide on Survival Hunter in the Dragonflight Prepatch. If you'd like to support me being a full-time guide writer and creator, consider checking out my Patreon in the description. Alright, here goes. So, firstly for survival, we're starting out with the builds. That is the sort of headline system of the Prepatch. And for this guide, we'll have both optimal setups for raiding and Mythic Plus. We're just going to start out here with the class tree. So the class tree has most of our utility and some defensives and stuff. And for the most part, it's pretty cookie cutter. So we're going to be picking up most of our defensives. Born to be Wild, lower turtle CDR. Hunter's Avoidance, which is basically 6% avoidance. Pathfinding, 6% movement speed. Nature's Endurance, which is 40% DR on Survival of the Fittest, which is amazing for surviving one-shots. Then we're picking out Improved Kill Shot here up top just for a little bit of damage. And most of the damage stuff really happens in the final 3 rows, where we're picking up Keen Eyesight, Master Marksman, and Dash Chakram, and a little bit of Serrated Shots. You can kind of swap as much as you want between Serrated Shots and Master Marksman. They're pretty similar. Alright, so for the spec tree, which is more interesting, we're going for a Mongoose Bite heavy build. And survival is probably the spec that has changed the most rotationally, going from Shadowlands with the tier set bonus that it's probably infamous at this point, probably will be for many years. We're going into a very different playstyle that is all about min-maxing your Mongoose Bites. Basically, it's not quite a 2-button spec, but you're gonna be spamming a lot of 2 to 3 buttons. And predominantly this will be Mongoose Bite. Mongoose Bite is basically, when you cast it, it gives you a stacking buff that increases the damage of your next Mongoose Bite. It's called Mongoose Fury. And the idea is to get as many Mongoose Bites into this window as possible. And basically we just brute force it by focusing our attention on maximizing focus generated with kill commands and whatnot. We're also picking up Intense Focus, which increases the focus generated by kill command. And then we're just going to take all that focus and we're going to send it into more and more Mongoose Bites. Flanking Strike is also an ability we're using, an active ability that you're probably not used to. And it's also going to generate some focus. So it's basically like a kill command on steroids. And what's notable for survival is we're going Venthyr. I'll get into that a little bit later. So that combines really well with this Ranger talent, which increases the damage of some of our range spells significantly. So compared to the rest of Shadowlands, we're even more ranged capable than perhaps we have been historically. Of course, we also pick up our main cooldown here in Coordinated Assault. And then we're picking up, some bomb damage. It's not going to be all about bombs like it was in towards the end of Shadowlands. But, the bombs still matter, but they kind of take a backseat compared to just spamming, Mongoose Bites and kill shots, as you'll see later. The AoE setup, here it's basically the exact same, but in the spec tree, we're picking up Frenzy Strikes, which is basically the effect that was previously built into Carve, where it would reduce the cooldown if you bomb when you used it. Well, the time of Carve is over because now Butchery is your best friend. What is Butchery? It's like Carve on steroids. A lot of steroids. Like, wow, you're wondering if Butchery is gonna have a heart attack soon, steroids. So Butchery is like Carve, but way more powerful. It has 3 charges and only costs 30 focus. And with this Frenzy Strikes, it has the same effect of reducing your bomb CD as Carve once did. So this is a way more dynamic and interesting and sort of the dynamic is really the best word for the rotation change here, because instead of just using Carve on cooldown and sort of using your bomb around that fact to not overcap your bombs, here you actually, because Butchery is on a free charge system, you can kind of move them around. It's not on a strict cooldown. You can use Butchery, Bomb, Butchery, for example. You can be way more free in the way you use them. That's what a charge system really does for spells, and that's really nice in my opinion. We're still going for Venthyr for the most part for AoE, and now that's why we're going for Ranger here, but we're also going one step further, which basically soups the crap out of Coordinated Assault in AoE situations. So basically this reduces the cooldown of your bomb during Coordinated Assault, which of course with the Deadly Tandem Conduit will be extended. And it generates focus when thrown, which will fuel your Butcheries, and kill shots cooldown will also be reduced, and it can be used all the time. And with the Venthyr stuff we're going to talk about, it's going to cleave, and it's going to be extra powerful because of Ranger. And there's just a lot of stuff going on. But underneath this AoE rotation, you'll still be using a lot of Mongoose Bite, min-maxing your single target damage. So the overarching strength of survival in the Prepatch is probably going to be single target, but your AoE is fantastic as well. Probably just not as to the OP extent that it was towards the end of Shadowlands. Alright, Moving on to the rotation. So obviously this will be quite a big change. So, what I want to bring your attention to here is mostly the Mongoose bite related lines. So, for example, here, when the Mongoose Fury buff I talked about earlier is about to expire, you really want to min-max the final few seconds where this Mongoose Fury is stacked all the way up to 5 times. And then, of course, in the talent tree, we're still dealing with Wildfire and Fusion, which you'll recognize. So we'll have the blue bombs, the red bombs, but we're going to be treating them very differently. Although this particular part is pretty similar. You're going to want to be spamming up the bleed from the Shrapnel bomb called Internal Bleeding with your Mongoose Bite, just like you did with Raptor Strike before. And, like this part, like this line 13, this will be maybe 40% of your time spent will just be spamming Mongoose Bite while this buff is active. Of course, talents that we're not choosing are also in this rotation. And in Dragonflight, when it releases properly, I'll have a checkbox list on this page where you can select the talents that you're actually using, and it'll clean up the rotation a little bit for you. But yeah, so, when you have nothing else to do but Mongoose Bite, then you just... when you run out of focus, that's the only time you sort of cast other spells. For example, Steel Trap, we're not choosing that. Fear of the Eagle, not choosing it either. Wildfire Bomb is not quite as low in priority. We use it when it's red with a pretty high priority, but as you can see here, the only other Wildfire Bomb line aside from this one when it's red is actually when you run out of the ability to Mongoose Bite, and that should tell you just how important Mongoose Bite and maximizing your Mongoose Bite casts is for the rotation. On AoE, it's a little bit different. Suddenly Wildfire Bomb becomes something you want to use on cooldown. You want to use your butcheries and carves around Wildfire Bomb to not overcap its cooldown. Another thing worth noting here is this wasn't really relevant because we were just drowning in bombs in Shadowlands. But yeah, Wildfire Bomb has a dot, guys. And it lasts 6 seconds. And the crappy thing about this dot is that it doesn't actually extend when you override it. So you have to space your bombs out by at least 6 seconds whenever you can. You don't want to let it hit 2 charges, but you definitely don't want to cast 2 bombs back to back if you can help it at all. Other than that, still using Killshot as a high priority, even though it's AoE, because via our Covenant Venthyr, it's going to cleave. Flanking Strike, more focus is still valuable. And, underneath all this, you're still going to be spamming Mongoose Bite as much as possible. This will be, even though this is far down the priority, you'll be spending quite a bit of time doing this. Alright, moving on to stats. And I'm sure you're already shocked at what the hell is Mastery doing as above the worst spec in the game that you want 0 of. Well, now that we are not so bump heavy in our damage output as Survival Hunters anymore, Mastery is actually a decent stat, because the whole issue with Mastery is that it increases the damage of your focus spending abilities, and unfortunately, Wildfire Bomb is free. But Mongoose Bite and Killshot are not, and those represent, over 50% of our damage combined now. So Mastery is suddenly a really good stat, and you'll probably find that when you sim yourself going into the pre-patch, because your gear, if you've been playing Survival until this point, you probably have a maximum of 68 Mastery on your gear, and that's because you need the Mechagon ring set. So when you log in and you set up your talents according to this guide and everything, and you run your gear and stat weights and whatnot, your Mastery stat weight will be through the roof, because you have none of it, and you have so much haste and everything, and it's gonna look like haste is the worst stat. Well, so the way I run these stat priorities is you look at how the stats are balanced out, how valuable they are when they're all equal, right? But you're not going into this with equal stats. You're going in with no Mastery and tons of haste. So haste is going to look like a worse stat than it is. You're still going to want a good amount of haste, but you're also going to want some Mastery, and criticals and striking versatility are both solid stats, but they're not headliners, let's just say. Gonna skip gems and enchants because it's basically an extension of this page. I've updated the gear and best and slot page, and this is basically just putting some actual Mastery on this stuff, so you're not just left with the BiS list with no Mastery, even though it's a valuable stat now. For Covenants, I've alluded to this a billion times now, but Venthyr is the way to go for survival for the most part in Dragonflight Prepatch. And that is basically because the Ranger talent increases the damage of Killshot baseline by 40%. And you have quite a bit of focus and free globals that you can spend on these kill shots, which would really screw with the rotation of the other specs. So when push comes to shove, Venthyr is extremely strong. That paired with the Unity Legendary, which basically puts a bleed on your targets, when you kill shot, that alone can do like 20% of your overall from what I've seen. So yeah, it's just absolutely ridiculous. For conduits, empowered release, pretty cookie cutter stuff. Strength of the pack, you'll be a huge fan of this if you've played survival in the past in Shadowlands. And then for the last conduit slot, we're going to be either using Stinging Strike for single target, or when there's any AoE or Mythic Plus, we go Deadly Tandem for the longer Coordinated Assault. Remember what I talked about with the Coordinated Assault in the talent section? It makes your kill shots and the bombs absolutely rip. Like, it's a completely different cooldown than the boring one you're used to from Shadowlands. As for Legendary, so for pure single target, we want to use Latent Poison Injectors. And you're looking at this tooltip and you're thinking, oh my god, this looks like so much work. I promise it isn't. Unless you're cleaving with it, but if you're cleaving, you should probably be using Wildfire Cluster anyway. And Wildfire Cluster you probably love because it's super simple and does great damage. Latent Poison Injectors, basically, we have a talent that will automatically apply Serpent Sting. So I'm just gonna, backtrack a little bit here. I'm gonna show you this cheeky talent called Viper's Venom. Gives Raptor Strike and Mongoose Bite a 50% chance, or 15% chance to apply Serpent Sting on a target. So that's why we don't spec into Serpent Sting, because it comes for free with the Viper's Venom talent. And as we use this, it's gonna stack up this debuff on our target, and whenever we use Mongoose Bite, which is all the freaking time, it's gonna consume a stack and it's gonna do some damage. So this is like all the damage from this legendary mostly happens in the background. The only thing, and now I'm gonna backtrack again, which is something I told myself I wouldn't do, but in AoE, if you are using the Latent Poison Injectors, you want to not multi-dot, but cycle your Mongoose Bites between different targets to consume Latent Poison Injectors. It stacks up to 10 times, and on a single target, you'll consume it on one stack every time. But if you put it up on in AoE, it'll stack up to 10 before you know it, and you have to spend consume the stacks with a Mongoose Bite before you just waste a ton of them. So yeah, that's basically the legendary meta. Now for Mythic Plus, I have the optimal setup for general Mythic Plus in here, which is basically also what's over in the builds and talent section. On the Sepulchre, Sanctum, and Castle Nethria pages, I have, a generic single target rating build here. But under each boss, I tell you to go for an AoE build if that is relevant, such as it might be for Artificer in Sepulchre and Vigilant Guardian, that's that kind of stuff. And also recommend optimal legendaries for each boss, depending on sort of what the boss asks for. So yeah, I hope you find that useful for going into survival in the Dragonflight pre-patch. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.